Hi, and welcome to Connections. I'm your Mayor Sam Campana, and I'm delighted to have you here with us today. And what a treat we have in store for you. As your mayor, I got to make the decision that I would appoint Scottsdale's first poet laureate. I had the unique opportunity and wonderful opportunity to meet America's poet laureate, Robert Pinsky. And I was so fascinated by him, and my guess is that you've seen him on Channel 8. He is actually one of the people that they have come in on Crossfire and speak, and he has done a great job of that. And I was sure that what Scottsdale would really love to have is a poet who could help us think about all the issues that are facing us, celebrate some of the wonderful things that have happened, and as every artist is required to do, to envision the future. How do you decide who's going to be Scottsdale's first poet laureate? Well, helps to know the mayor. And this is a gentleman who has been a close personal friend of mine for about 12 years, right?
I don't want as long as you've been in the public eye.
I think it has. Actually. I think it has. So let me introduce you to Geoffrey Platts, who is Scottsdale's first poet laureate. But Geoffrey, I knew you, as you still are. I don't mean to say you aren't anymore, but when I first knew you, I only knew you as a warrior. You were intent upon saving the Sonoran Desert. And I know that that still is uppermost in your mind, but that's really how I came to know you. Do you remember that?
Personally, did we actually make connection personally?
No.
I remember Mountain Shadows once I met you. I mean, that was a few years ago, but I don't remember actually coming in politically to see you.
You did not, but we knew you, of course, because you were such an ardent advocate of the desert. And the work that you did and the letters that you wrote, and really you were always in the public forefront reminding us how precious that desert is and that it really belongs not to any one individual but to all of us. We are all stewards.
Yes, indeed. Those were the days that Jonathan Marshall was the publisher of the Scottsdale Progress. And in fact, he was a lone voice in the valley because at that time the idea of preservation hadn't really sunk in, had it?
No, it had
frankly.
Not.
So we were on the forefront.
Our future seemed endless, and you had to drive for miles before you ever really got into the true Sonoran Desert, and yet you live there. You're surrounded every day by that desert.
Exactly, but one never knows for how long. You know, it's a changing world, and as more people come in, of course, the demands are greater on it. But there were good days. There were younger days, and there was a lot of fire in the belly in those days, and I think there still is.
There still is. You're just expressing
an ember or
it.
two.
You're just expressing it in a different way. That's right.
I hope is a sign of maturity.
Tell us about where you live, though. I think that's just so interesting, Geoffrey.
Well, I'm not disposed to reveal where I live for obvious. I'm a bit of a coyote in that respect, but I live in an area that has been, for the most part, well, certainly undeveloped, but for the most part, as much as any desert around here, doesn't bear much scars of man's habitation. And that actually says something, because I think the last 100 years from the first time the railroad arrived, I think that it changed the whole face of the land, even biologically, with the livestock and so forth that came in. Nonetheless, it's a very wild area, and there's a part of me that loves wildness. I grew up in a very middle class English background. I was sent away to boarding school at 8, like all wretched little English boys are.
We knew you were English. There was a little something there that gave that away.
But you know, I always had that. I always had a deep love for the natural world, and as a boy, I grew up in a time when my mother would just say, "Well, have a good day roaming in the woods, Geoffrey," and I'd go, and I'd come. You know, she didn't seem to worry. English parents don't worry so much about their parents, almost to a fault. Oh, you know, we'll see you later. You know, so I go and I'd come back all scratched, and I made it. I was back in one piece, and I think it gave me a sense of independence. It gave me a sense of wildness, even though my structure was pretty, you know, boarding school, British Army, you know, pretty authoritarian. I've always tended to resist authority ever since. Can you understand why?
I see.
But
did people know where David Thoreau lived?
Yes, because he only lived 2 miles away from town,
Oh,
Henry.
is that right?
And apparently, he, much as I admire him tremendously, but he knew which side his bread was buttered on. His mother lived in Concord, and he'd go down there and get his cookies and everything. He was quite sociable.
That is interesting.
He was actually quite sociable for a recluse, and he couldn't really be called a recluse because he didn't live far enough away.
Far enough away. I don't think I ever realized that he was that close in. You always think of
You
Walden
do,
Pond
you do,
as being,
you
sort of
do.
out in the wilderness.
What he did have, though, was a deep understanding of wilderness and love for it, even though he wasn't actually in it. I'm sure that he could. I was reading a piece the other day where he said, when I go for a walk, I automatically choose to go to the west, because the east, I always assume I'm going to run into something, which of course was a fair thought in those days. And but he wasn't really a wild man, but he had a deep, deep appreciation for it. He knew what it meant to cherish the wild. We tend to be taming ourselves so much these days, don't we?
And yet there
Taming and
really
taking
is
care
this
of
longing,
ourselves.
and you begin to see that manifest more and more. And it's because we're losing it. It's
True.
because we're losing it.
But
I
not
think that's
just
true.
not just the land itself, the spirit within
Inside,
us.
Inside. So you went from being this thoughtful, passionate man who wrote letters to the editor and stirred in us, all of us, that awareness that we had to save our Sonoran Desert. And then you became an author. It's pretty respectable, and wrote Trek, Man Alone in the Arizona Wild. How long ago was that, Geoffrey?
Well, that was about 8 years ago, and all I did simply was put together the many journals that I'd always written automatically, and then edited them and put them, 8 of them, 8 solo experiences. Have you had a chance to look into it? You're probably too busy, haven't you?
Do you know, it's wonderful because you don't have to sit down and read it all at once.
No.
And you really can open it sort of chapter by chapter and
Really?
read it and feel good about it.
Well, you've been very supportive of the idea of it, and I really appreciate that.
Well, I should confess to our viewers that we've had, and I don't want to misrepresent this, we've had this correspondence that's actually gone on for longer than a year. You have written to me almost every day as mayor, as a public official.
Now, why would they misunderstand that, Sam?
Well, part of it, I don't want them to misunderstand the correspondence because
I
that intimates
understand
there's
that.
2 people doing that.
I
And I
understand.
probably have maybe sent you a dozen
Yes,
notes.
but that's all right. You know that you don't have time. Period. In the position that you've chosen.
I don't
And,
know how I came to have that gift, but I will now with everyone here. Thank you again for that. You just can't imagine, because you sort of know the hours that I keep, and I think most people do, to be back in the office at 9 or 9:30 at night and to be there for another 4 or 5 hours, going through the day's correspondence and catching up on reading and making sure that I really understand issues and responding to email. But here's a postcard, or here's a letter, and always in this beautiful calligraphy. I'm going to find a piece here that sort of will show the kind of thing that I get. And it's a gift every day, really. You can't imagine what it's meant to me.
Well, I'm very happy, and I intended it as that. But I also should say that strenuously I avoided the political.
Yes, you did.
Strenuously, because I've spent so long, 22 years, doing that. And once you step into that realm, with all due respect, another reality presents itself. So my whole thrust these days is to approach life and conservation from and mayors, and accessible mayors, God bless you, your worshipful mayor, from a poetic standpoint, and nobody can argue with that.
I remember one particular night, and I think it was after a difficult city council meeting, and you'd sent me an Arab proverb, and it said, there are 3 kinds of people: those who move,
It's coming to me.
those who something, and those
wish I
who
could
are
have-
immovable.
And those who are immovable.
I thought, oh, I needed that. I needed to know that all the way back, 2,000 years, that was human nature, and that this isn't something that's just being visited upon
Absolutely.
this mayor.
Well, it's a pleasure to do it, and I'm also aware that it doesn't stop at you. I'm also aware that the gift of poetry doesn't stop at you. There's probably, you've shared 1 or 2 now and again. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
you've never shown me a book by where you have a book, and
I do.
so they don't stop at the desk. And even if they stay on the desk, somebody else might see them.
Well, they don't stop at the desk at all, and of
So,
course, my staff looks forward to them as much as I do. But we have a very active mayor's office, and people know right away, first that how interested I am in the arts.
Well, this, of course, is it.
Poetry, obviously, is something we've had. You're the third poet that we've commissioned as a city now. We
Good.
commissioned a poet to dedicate our new water campus. We commissioned a poet to dedicate the Civic Center Mall. We commissioned a poet to dedicate the Pima Freeway. And now we have a poet laureate, and we commissioned you to do an ode for the millennium.
To the 2000,
Yes.
that's right.
Can you tell us about how that came to be in a poet's creative process?
Well, you've given me a gift that I hardly suspected that would come to me, because although I've always had a deepest appreciation for other people's poetry, I've never claimed that status. You know, yes, I have had certain things published and they've been poetic, but I haven't actually thought in the manner of a poet. And yet, if I look it up in the dictionary, I find that the second definition of poet is a person with sensibilities beyond the normal perception of things. So
Right.
I could well fit into that category without
Absolutely.
writing a poem. But what happened here was it's a great gift to me personally, even if the thing never goes anywhere, because it made me focus on an idea. And it enabled me to bring in the idea of not only of warning, which the poet's position is. Wordsworth thought that the poet had the position of a spiritual teacher, and that he had to, you know, warn as well as congratulate. And in this poem, I'm sorry, I'm pointing at something. In this particular poem, of course, we talk about the prophecy, which has been prophesied for many times, that if you ruin the land will not support you anymore.
Will not support you.
We see it all over the world. It's gone on since Roman times. The Romans learnt that. And yet, on the other hand, the exuberance of the other side. If you treat the land well, then it will treat you well. And also, tying in the idea of loving yourself. If you don't love yourself, you're not going to treat anybody, your family, your neighbors, the land well. So you have to start with that principle, which is the hardest of all quests, I think, in an age where there are many problems in this area, of loving yourself, of
That's
having, I don't use the word esteem, it's too overused, having self-regard. And once you can build that up, and it usually comes later in life, doesn't it? It takes a while.
I think that's true.
Then you take that on to your fellow man and to the land. And I don't think you're complete until you have all three. If you're just in your fellow man and you're concerned about him, I don't think it's enough. I think the land is so much, it upholds us, it upholds our feet. So
And the
this,
thought that
I tried to cover that in this.
And you did beautifully, and I would really love to have you read that for us,
Certainly.
Geoffrey, if you would.
I'd be happy to do it. I should say that it came with remarkable ease, and I don't say that in any bragging way. It just flowed. I didn't plan it. The muse must have been with me that night.
But you live this, Geoffrey. This is something that came from you, I think, that you've carried this with you for as long as I've known you. So it's
Thank you.
wonderful that we got to put it on paper.
Bless your heart. By the way, January the 15th is the year anniversary.
Is that right?
Yes,
Have you
in
started?
2
Oh,
days'
how
time.
wonderful. Oh,
122 pieces.
is that right?
I'm not bragging about the numbers. I shouldn't be into numbers, but I
But
thought, you know, that's
I love
one
it.
every third day, in fact.
Oh, well,
You know, when you think about it spread over a weekend, it's 122 times 3 is 1 per 3 days.
well, I knew it was almost daily, and of course that wouldn't count, you know,
And some
Saturday and
probably
Sunday, the
arrive
weekend. Absolutely.
Together, right? Isn't that
Rarely.
fun? Isn't that
Almost
fun?
every day.
Well,
Wonderful.
that's it, I'm afraid, Sam. Sorry about that. That's the end. No, just
I know.
I'll
I know
keep
you're
them coming.
kidding. I'm going to
You
count
need
on
them
that.
now more than any.
That's
any
right.
time.
That's right. You still have a 5-month job here.
Bless your heart. This is Ode to 2000. Citizens of Scottsdale, citizens of everywhere, on the street, in the home, among the woods, beside the coast, wherever you are, raise up a toast. Greet and meet a millennium to be, the 3rd 1,000 years A.D. Oh, hail it heartily and mark it well, though nature marks it not. 'Tis not to her but the briefest spell. People of the West, summon up your best and shout, hooray! Si, amigos, a cantar, ole. Here's to the 1,000 years ahead, to all its living and all its dead, To all its hopes and all its fears, to all its glory, 10,000 cheers. 20 centuries have run. What's done is done. These last 2,000 years, the good, the bad, the kind, the cruel, the glad, the sad, the mad, all have passed at last, at last. Herbs to the Romans, polis to the Greeks, city to modern him who seeks in that topsy-turvy haunt of women and of men his chance to tower in the halls of power. Art, commerce, and pleasing things that do divert, all are here in this desert realm with a distaff mare at its helm. Her city yearns to make its name. Luminaries come and go from distant lands, unending flow of travellers searching out the sun. Old Sol, he that smites so pure with ever light and bright allure. But how long's the life of name and fame? Will forever herbs and polis and city stay the steadfast same? Nothing sure, save a time-honoured truth that whenever and wherever man tears nature with claw and tooth, he's doomed to slip and fail, and know again, sad tale, his wrack and ruin and woe and wail. Forest, desert, ocean, sky, nature loves them each the same. Why then must man them maim and often strive to tame? Our folk love the earth about you, and all shall go well. Yes, all shall go well for longer years than we alive can ever tell. But if you love it not, beware, for your cities shall fall. Thus has it been since time immemorial. Salute to the original peoples, the long-dwelling race, with whom now we share this desert place. Their forebears, those that came before, earthwise, strong, rich with nature's law, sons and daughters of the sand, their understanding of this land, alongside which they hardy grew, did sagely serve to bring them through. If truly humble we of now can be, their wisdom's plain for us to see in yon flickering light of many a bygone century. 'Tis a truth so old, yet plenty call it hard. Still it's one that's oft spoken by the bard. Love thyself, and thou shalt love this earth. Aye, love thyself, and thou shalt also love thy kind. Then, in loving men and women, while deep caring for our earth, thy sweeter, higher, nobler self will come to know its birth. The ancients say the millennium has other meaning deep, the 1,000 years of peace, when woman and man will glad make lordly leap, and chained in black, black pit will frightful evil keep, and good and greatness shall prevail, an age of gold without travail. Poet Tennyson's lines, writ down an age ago, said it brave and said it so. Ring out the old, ring in the new, ring out the false, ring in the true. And more wrote he to hearten thee and me. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. The poet sees beyond the gates, and through them a fresher world awaits. So each of you, all of you, hope for it, thirst for it, pray for it, pen poems for it, dream it into being. Make sturdy the foundation for a newly born nation. City, world, young and old, city, world, timid or bold, city, world, dark or pale, no longer dumb, no longer stale, no longer numb, no longer frail. Fathers, brothers, kith or kin, sisters, mothers, forget your skin. All races in all places, here to world's end, each to the other calls out, friend. Millenarians all, Heed well this call. Go forth, lion hearts, with might and main. Go forth, bold souls, attain, attain. Thank you.
Oh, Geoffrey, that's wonderful.
No, you're not just saying that.
I'm not just saying that.
Just joking.
You know, there's a couple of things. When you write, and it's so exquisite and it's so inspiring, nature's always capitalized. Tell me about that. And even when you say it.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Even when you spoke it in that beautiful poem, you knew that nature was foremost, was important,
Right.
was capital.
Well, I bless your heart for saying that, because as you know, I've been quiet. This is my quiet campaign. It's been going on for years. And my feeling is that nature is most deserving of being capitalized, for heaven's sake. I really cannot see why in recent, and I stress this, in recent decades, probably from the beginning of this century, suddenly nature that was always capitalized. If you look in Whitman, you always find nature capitalized. If you look in Emerson, you'll find it capitalized. Thoreau, once in a while there'll be a small one, but for the most part, all the writers, the great writers, gave nature her due. And I suppose it's like, doesn't mayor look better with a capital M than a small m, honestly? I mean, it does, and that's due to the title of this, and so it should be. And so it really bothers me because, of course, the symbol of it, if you start to look at it, language is so powerful. It's all that distinguishes us from animals. And if you see the symbolism, basically it says, to me, I stress that, it says we don't really hold nature in very high regard, so we'll just put a small n on. My theory is, and I haven't been able to prove this, is that when the Industrial Revolution began in Britain, it was terrible destruction to the natural world. You know, suddenly these beautiful villages and these countryside became coal slag heaps and pits, and
Smoke.
it changed the whole face of the world. I mean, it began something that still has not stopped, basically. And I have a feeling that somehow that the savants and the wise men, or the people in charge of language, looked at nature with a capital N and said, I don't think it's appropriate that we keep it this way anymore. It might give the wrong idea. And so I think it slipped out of favor. And so we're still stuck with it. Although once in a while I'll see a capital N. You know, I half jokingly, but only half jokingly, suggest the city of Scottsdale started off. And in fact, I should perhaps do a formal Laureate request on that.
See?
People get a bit nervous about it. They think it's sort of deifying it. It's, you know, it has connotations on the other side of the fence that get people nervous. But for heaven's sake, without nature, God's manifestation of the living world, we have nothing.
Is it Mother Nature, Geoffrey?
Yes. Don't you think nature's feminine?
Well.
She's sort of, she's rich, she's fertile, she's wild. To use that wonderful word, fecund. She's fertile. I mean, she's everything that probably the male principle isn't. The male principle tends to be in the head, the intellect. And this is a wide generalization. You may have to edit this out. Wild generalization, but she produces, she gives birth. And I think all these things, well, there's a theory among the feminists that when you start treating nature well, you'll start treating women well, because the two are really inseparable. I don't say that always happens, because when you find a man who loves nature, like John Muir, you find a real, I mean, when a man finally gets into it, there's no man loves it more, no person. But generally speaking, women are more sympathetic to the natural world.
Well, it sort of always has been Mother Nature.
Well, she went out and gathered and harvested.
There was something else that I remember. I think you may have created this word, and it has to do with your facility for the language and your love of the written and spoken word. But I think that you created the term Disneyfication, the Disney desert.
Fred Osmond and I.
Is that right?
Fred, you know Fred?
The architect, absolutely.
Has a good mind for you. Well, we actually just felt that it was to me, it's rather regrettable. It's understandable, because, and it all starts in England. Let's blame it on England.
Well, since you're the English expatriate, you can do that, yes.
It starts back in the 1800s, where nature was, it was all right to go out and do wonderfully exciting things and explore it with all these amazing explorers, men and women, by the way. There's some amazing women explorers in those days, believe it or and go to Africa and this, that, and the other. But there was always a tendency to want to tame what you found, to make, you know, it was well-meaning. You know, we'll give them some agriculture, and so they'll be able to have their bread and so forth. But they've been going pretty well for thousands of years. But there was also a tendency in gardens, in the great garden. Have you been to Britain?
I have.
Have you seen the great gardens?
Yes, I have.
I mean, they are lovely, but they're all manipulated.
Yes.
Capability Brown, you know, the great gardens are superb, but they're all controlled.
Contrived.
Contrived and controlled. And of course, essentially, Britain is contrived and controlled biologically, ecologically. There's nothing hardly left of what was.
Wild.
Which I always feel a bit sad, because there's a good example to see what this could become. If you want to see, but people say, oh, but it's so nice, it's so cute, you know, little villages and things, but it isn't ecologically sustained, you know. So I'm getting off on a track, but basically.
But
I'd
I
like to
asked
keep
you
on.
that because I like to see how
No,
your
I want to
works.
come quickly back to it, because I think we got off track. But we were saying Disneyland is essentially the desert. What happens is it's quite understandable, but it's not wise, but it's understandable, and of course it's all over now.
Right.
When Fred and I first coined the term, we were just seeing it happen, and there was the tendency to take a full Palo Verde, a beautiful flower. You've seen them in full bloom, a gorgeous thing, this lluvia de oro, rain of gold, you know, and then suddenly there's this. What it is it's fear of wild. It's the fear of the wild nature, and as long as you have it controlled, you're not worried about a little snakey coming in or, you know, a tarantula.
Spider.
You have your desert, but it's not real desert. It's Disney desert, and you do a compromise. You don't want all this rough, ugly-looking stuff. You know, you cleaned out. But I think those trees. I have a friend, Michelle Burson's Earth Rally days in Cave Creek. She called them eek trees, which was a wonderful. You know how they cut them?
So you can walk under
But
them.
it
and you're
really
not
is
gonna be
sad
harmed.
because of habitat-wise, it's useless. It may look all right, but in terms of habitat, it's useless. I hate to say that, but it is. I think any scientist would bet that.
When I listen to you recite our Millennium poem, and that's the second time I've heard it recited, but I've read it several times now, there's another concept that runs through that, Geoffrey, that I think must be important to you, and that's diversity. You refer back to the Native Americans, the first people
Right.
that habitated
The
this
original
land.
peoples.
I was so glad that you included some Spanish phrases
Yes,
in
I
that
love Spanish.
for
I
both
speak
the
Spanish.
contemporary Hispanic population we have, but after all, this land was settled by
Of course it was.
Spaniards. So I love that, because it's one of the things that's most important to me, is for us to really understand different cultures and embrace the diversity that we're really starting to see blossom
Embrace
here
it
in
rather
Scottsdale.
than tolerate it.
And I think that
because we
again must
have
go
to.
back to nature with you, though, that it
I
takes
think it is.
takes everything for us to be our most healthy and to be our richest. You can't just take that saguaro out and say, well, I like that, and let's plant that alone. You know, there really has to be something of everything.
There is, and of course, the poor El Saguaro, what even the landscapers that are being well paid these days don't tell you, or probably don't even know, is that the point about the scruffy stuff is to stop, you know how the lateral roots of the saguaro?
Right.
Now all there is blazing sand, so there's nothing to protect the saguaro from the lateral root systems that are being pounded by the sun. So in the end, it doesn't serve itself. I mean,
And
I
it's
can understand
unsustainable.
why.
And it's unsustainable.
I can understand it. I mean, it fits in that English idea of neat. It's the neatness thing. You know, we all have it in us. I mean, we're all. It's the northern people seem to be consumed with this idea of little squares and
Bringing
we
order
need
to
this,
chaos.
exactly, to prevent ourselves being swallowed up by the great chaos. The British in India had a tremendously difficult time dealing with the marvelous diversity of India. You were in India.
I
Have you
haven't
been
been.
there? But apparently, you remember Passage to India, that movie?
Oh, of course.
Well, remember how they make
Beautiful.
everything more English than the English, and they have this little place, it's 5 acres, and there are all these nice little bungalows and green, and they're all playing things. That's to keep the chaos of India from making them mad. And some men went native and had a wonderful time, but that was the end of their career. They couldn't go native. They couldn't be pulled into this fascinating hodgepodge of color. Mexico is a touch of that, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
You know, and you find little pockets of it here, but it's the kind of thing that we dip into and then go back home.
Yeah,
to
no,
our
it is. It
cultured
is
garden.
true. You're
Yeah.
quite right. I mean, I suppose it comes from insecurity at some level or other. I mean, if we're secure with all peoples and all things, then we do embrace them. We're happy to go down to the the pueblos in Sonora. I know them down there. And in fact, this isn't just token. I speak Spanish.
Do
so
you?
It's not a token line.
It sounded
out.
like it.
Yeah.
It sounded like it.
And it's lovely. It's like stepping back 50, 75 years. I love that. Instead of being freaked, I think this is wonderful. They're still, hauling water up from the...
That's
I
right.
mean, I'm a bit of a Luddite, I'm afraid.
I know that people, if they tuned in and heard you just read that Millennium poem, are entranced just by hearing you in the wonderful way that you speak and pronounce and deliver our English language. People can hear you always on Halloween.
Yes, they can. Absolutely.
But you do, from time to time, come down out of the Sonoran Desert and make yourself available to the public.
I do indeed. I'm not the hermit I'm made out to be at all. I even get clean clothes on and everything now.
We're gonna you
Just
clean
for
you,
though,
you clean
Sam.
up
If
very
it'd been
nicely.
anybody else,
Yes.
they come in old scruffy jeans.
We're going to post you on our website for the city. We're going to have you at a mayor's breakfast with several of our other poets who we've commissioned. Tell us more about how we can access you. What are some other ways we can get to know you? And do you have another poem that you can share with us?
I do indeed. I just wrote it. You see, you've inspired. If it wasn't for you, this would not have been written. And I can say that. I'm not flattering you. This is not sycophant. I'm not a sycophant.
Do I get to add muse to my resume as I go out?
Absolutely. We'll make it French. Musée.
Oh, musée.
Musée. That means museum. You don't want to
Oh,
be a
no,
museum.
no, not that, not that.
Are you going to start a mayoral library like Clinton, like all the presidents do?
You know, it's really been wonderful because that is something that has come to me probably as the arts mayor. I do have a tremendous collection now of really wonderful art books
I bet you do.
books of poetry, including one from the Poet Laureate of the United States. But I'm going to
nice.
send him your book and tell
Bless
him
your
that
heart.
he inspired me and thus inspired
Bless
you.
your heart. You did mention, you asked me, I was talking to an old friend and your excellent, what do they say in the army, aide-de-camp?
My aide-de-camp, I know exactly, yes, Pat Dodds.
Lovely man. And my only thought for the Millennium poem is that, begging your pardon, but it isn't going far enough. And I'm not being, in other words, it's a special idea you
That's
had
right.
with this laureateship. The poem I wrote, and it really, I think, needs to go selectively out beyond the borders of the state. Now, is that being too ambitious? Or?
Now, England has a poet laureate,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Andrew Motion.
Andrew Motion, you told me that.
But I just think...
Tell me, the Queen commissions him to do a poem
That's
or
correct. It's a royal. It's
dedication?
absolutely right. He's a member of the royal household. Did you know that?
No,
I'm a
I
member of your
didn't.
royal household.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, I love that too. I do. How would we go about that? Now, I know
Well,
that there were, the internet offers us some ways, but do I need to share this with my fellow mayors around the country?
Well, the reason that I'm saying is it's not really that personal. It's just that you have gone to the trouble. In a sense, you've stuck your neck out doing something that hasn't been done in the West, except in San Francisco, where Ferlinghetti, I'm told, is poet laureate. Did you know
really?
that?
I did not. No.
And I think that probably, it's a first, just as your own group of assistants. Didn't I call it a gynarchy or something? Or a
I love that.
gynococracy or something? It's a wonderful word.
Matriarchy.
I did want to ask you, but I shouldn't be asking now because we're supposed to be talking about me. But that must be the first in Western civilization, isn't it? I don't know. Never heard of that, ever.
Isn't that something?
Look it up. You might be able to emblazon it on as your firsts.
I like
five,
that.
are there five?
There are, yes.
Think about that, because I think that's got a lot of worth. That's good news.
Well, it's been wonderful for me. It's
I
been
know
wonderful
that.
for the city.
I'm sure
That's
of it.
the best.
I'm
We've been
delighted
well
by it,
served
too.
by that.
But anyway,
How do we get
it out? I said, I thought possibly that, first of all, you took the chance with doing this. Secondly, it induced me to do what I've never done in deep seriousness, frankly, and that's write a poem. It's also produced, because of it, another one for the earth that I'll read to you in a minute. But it seems to me that having done this, and you've commissioned me to do this, that you would really want the poem. It would be Scottsdale's
That's
gift,
right.
not just to Arizona or the local,
Our
foothills,
citizens, right?
but selectively to, I don't know, the mayor. All the not
I
every
do.
mayor in town, but the mayor of Chicago.
I do.
Just a little note saying this is so that Scottsdale is recognized as having done something. even though it applies, some of it applies, of course, to specifically to Scottsdale. I don't know, is that unreasonable?
Every mayor knows Scottsdale, but
Sure.
for me to show them how well their community can be served by that, I think that they would be very intrigued.
You see, there is an it's not a personal, I'm not trying to put myself forward personally so much as
because you
realizing that if you do this, the idea might take. And that's what I want more than anything out of this position, is that, first of all, to induce people to see the beauty and power of poetry and the curative nature of it, which is another thing I don't know if it's time to talk about, the curative dimension.
I'm going to have you read me that new poem so I can see that
And
curative nature.
so that it just doesn't die on the vine at the end of January. And I said to Pat, he's probably sent about 5. I mean, it's not any reflection on him, but he's doing what he normally does. But I see it in a larger species. Why not? It's 33-cent stamp and a note from you to Chicago. The Philadelphia. Doesn't matter if they don't reply. No, it's sent out.
They've seen it and hopefully been inspired.
And most people's celebrations, Phoenix and all that, are done with. Whatever they did, I don't know what they did, and that's it. Over with. You see, you can run with this one. Ephemeral.
That's right. That's right.
Read me your poem. Just like the mayoralty, ephemeral, right? You can run with it. I mean, make the best of it.
I will.
And take credit for it, because it's without you, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. It's very exciting. We have really loved it, and we're a better city for it.
I mean, believe me, I send it out all over the place, but I think with the officialdom behind it, it'll move a bit further. Just to let them know, and I would say you've probably got, the new year, technically, when it is then, end of January?
No, we have a year. There's lots of people who think that the new millennium, doesn't begin for a whole another 12 months.
This came, and I'm not flattering you when I say this, it came as a direct result of the excitement and the addictive nature of poetry. Have you ever tried to get into a poem? Once you get into it, it's incredibly addictive. You can't leave it alone. Everything else is, you don't want to eat, you're into it. It's like any other artistic This came as a result of the Desert Forest Land Trust wanting to buy Gojon Canyon.
Yes.
500 acres. You probably know a bit about it.
I do. I have read that. Very exciting.
I said to Chuck Bune, I've known Chuck for a long time, and Melissa, his lovely wife, I said, they wanted me to write another column. I said, I've written so many columns I can't even see straight. I've done that. I've passed it. I'll tell you what, though, I'll write a poem for you. And he kind of winced a bit at first. And I said, this is the only way, this is the only enthusiasm you can get out of me. I mean, there's a limit to what you can do with the eco-political. You know that. There's a limit to the political life.
That's right.
Anyway, so I thought I'll dash them one off, and then, of course, I got swept up in it. So this is what they took to their meeting last night. Senator Kyle was there. I don't, for better or worse. He in other words, maybe they'll read that. Maybe somebody read it. They wanted me to read it. You were the most important thing. Senators can wait. You were the most important thing. I wanted to be fresh for this morning. I couldn't drag off to that at night and then get a no sleep. Anyway, seriously.
That's lovely.
Viva Sonora. Geoffrey Platts, Poet Laureate, Scottsdale, Arizona. The canyon's name? Gojon. John? John who? You ask. Well, did he go? You're taking me to task because I do not know. Whimsy. All folk fade and fail at last, then quietly creep into the past, but not the land. Nay, nay, the land's a mother that never dies. That's what the Hopi say. Yet now and loud that canyon cries to be forever saved from money men who come to blade and build. They form a guild. They act with power. And in their gilded, G-I-L-D, world, such as here we often see, these men do tower above this cactus ground, all around. Like it or nay, whate'er you may say, the dollar does rule. Although from that dollar can come another kind of jewel, a piece of cherished earth, great beauty, without a hint of dearth. But just to speak with love of precious desert flora and also desert fauna, or even be a mourner for our lovely living land, these sentiments alone will sadly save it not. Such our weary world's way. Pray that changes some nearby day. Thus, as we at present stand to protect this timeless land, to set it free, to give it pulsing, ardent life for untold years to be, you are all called on now to make a vow, to be generous, to be giving, to be grand, to be kind. Mind that your kin and their kin's kin will bless and praise you if you do, as will wildlife thank thee in their way too. There is no nobler gift than that of land to roam for those who are yet to come and for those still here at home. And yes, for all the shrubs, the grubs, the birds and wild herds, the bushes, the rushes, the flowers, the showers, for the scurrying ants in their worker trance, for the sakes of snakes, some that do flee from thee and me, others that rattle so as not to give battle. Por tecolotes y coyotes. You know,
for the owls.
Yeah, good for you. Por tecolotes y coyotes, for come again vultures and gone away cultures, for choyas and oyas, for all desert life in peace or in strife. Friends of a rare, rare corner in a wide, wide earth, to our preserve of singular worth, we will soon give joyous birth. Now, go strong for Go John, and Go John will go long for you. What do you think? I don't know. You know,
Senator Kyle should have heard you recite it.
I know.
And I'm going to see him in the morning, and I'm going to take a tape of this so that he can watch it at his leisure.
Wow, now there is something
we'll
for you. So I killed two birds with one stone. I get a night's sleep last night, and you, in that case, you take that as your copy anyway.
Okay, I'll make sure that he has that.
And be sure to do that, yeah.
It's so beautiful. Do you know, people are going to be very unhappy because I've spent this time chatting with you, and then to hear you recite this poetry is so lovely, and we're down to just a very few moments.
How many moments?
A very few.
And we can go no further.
That's true, but you know, you had one that was going to help me as I'm retiring
yes,
as
I must
mayor,
read you
and
that.
I would really love that. You know,
there's no stretching it then, they go on a tape one. I was going to say there's just one other one, but I don't want to force the...
Yeah,
the
he's giving me 3 minutes, I know.
Okay.
Do you know, I love being mayor, you know that, and I'm going to miss it desperately. I know it's the right decision for me, but this kind of thing will help me as I make this transition. So
I don't doubt it for a minute, and I know that it's a completely different world you go into, but there are other worlds beyond worlds, aren't there?
That's right.
Absolutely. By Ralph Waldo Emerson. Goodbye, proud world, I'm going home. Thou art not my friend, and I'm not thine. Long through thy weary crowds I roam, a river arc on the ocean brine. Long I've been tossed like the driven foam, but now, proud world, I'm going home. Goodbye to flattery's fawning face, to grandeur with his wise grimace, to upstart wealth's averted eye, to supple office, low and high, to crowded halls, to court and street, to frozen hearts and hasting feet. To those who go and those who come, goodbye, proud world. I'm going home. I'm going to my own hearthstone, bosomed in yon green hills alone, a secret nook in a pleasant land, whose groves the frolic fairies plan, where arches green the livelong day echo the blackbird's roundelay, and vulgar feet have never trod a spot that is sacred to thought and God. Oh, when I am safe in my sylvan home, I tread on the pride of Greece and Rome. And when I am stretched beneath the pines, where the evening star so wholly shines, I laugh at all the lore and the pride of man, at the sophist schools and the learned clan. For who are they all in their high conceit, when man in the bush with God may meet?
Goodbye, proud world, I'm going home.
Isn't that wonderful?
It is wonderful.
Isn't that a wonderful one? I did send it to you. You
Oh,
probably have
thank
it. I should write it out someday so you have it in a long...
And in your beautiful calligraphy.
Absolutely.
I'm going to close by thanking you for all the work that you have done, Geoffrey, and the poem, the second one that you wrote for the Canyon about it's not enough to mourn, that we have work to do and we have to be generous and give. You've done that for all of
Bless
us.
your
You've
heart.
done that
Thank
for
you.
the desert. You've done that
Bless
for
your heart.
Scottsdale, and you've done that for me. I love you for that, Geoffrey.
I love you
and
too, Mark. Well, you've opened up doors for not only for yourself, for me, but I think beyond. I think this is going to go somewhere. And I don't necessarily mean I'm just a means for it. You know what I mean? The idea, I think, will spread.
It's wonderful, and of course it's what I'm interested in, but I'm only a
And-
consumer. You're the artist, and you've been wonderful
but
and
that
generous.
will change.
No.
That will change.
You've been wonderful and generous to
Thank
share
you.
yourself
It's a
with us
pleasure.
this morning. Geoffrey Platts, Scottsdale's poet laureate. Thank you for joining us. Wasn't this a treat, as promised? Thank you, Geoffrey.
Bye-bye. Thank you.